Zionism, fascism with a mythological rationalization for terrorism and territory. It's difficult for normal people to fathom the mindset of psychopaths. It is hard for sane people to understand the fanaticism of the God is a real estate agent crowd. And for some reason, so long as a group can maintain victimhood status, they can deflect and excuse their current abhorrent behavior. The individuals who would make up the first Israeli government and institutions were the same people who formed terrorist organizations, where by any means necessary they would get Jews to move to Palestine, even if it meant working with the Nazis, even if it meant murdering children. The Haganah, Irgun, and Stern gangs were involved in terrorism well before the creation of Israel in 1948. The list of atrocities could not be covered in a single film, but one incident sticks out which really displays their ardent attitude for an ethnic state, and that is the SS Patria. Rather than allowing illegal Jewish refugees to leave Palestine, they bombed the ship the day it was leaving and murdered hundreds of people. November 25, 1940. Jewish terrorists, organized by the Jewish Agency, which would later become the Israeli government, sank the SS Patria off of Haifa. The ship was full of Jewish refugees. The bombing killed between 282 and 267 people. Not all the bodies were recovered. It also injured 172 more, and there were 50 British crewmen among the dead. The paramilitary group Haganah, which later became the IDF, and Irgun terrorists bombed the Patria on the day it was leaving with the Jewish refugees. The people had survived Hitler's Europe, only to die at the hands of wicked Zionists. And until it was revealed who had done the bombing, the first story put out blamed the British, and later the story became that the refugees, saddened to leave, had bombed it themselves. Yes, the Jewish terrorists blamed the victims. The Haganah role was finally publicly disclosed in 1957, when Monya Mardor, the operative who had planted the bomb, confessed of his activities in the Jewish underground. He recounted, "There was never any intent to cause the ship to sink. The British would have used this against the Jewish population and show it as an act of sabotage against the war effort." Great apology. Never mind murdering so many people, because it would be bad PR. Some leaders of the Jewish community in Palestine argued that the loss of life had not been in vain, as Patria survivors had been allowed to stay in the country. Think about that. It was okay to kill a bunch of people, including children, so long as it made other people remain in the country. Note that none of these people were from Palestine in the first place. They had come there from Europe. British authorities were deporting them from Palestine to Mauritius because they lacked entry permits. The Haganah claimed to have miscalculated the effects of the explosion. Well, the bomb blew a 6-meter hole in the ship, which turned sideways and sank in less than 16 minutes. Hundreds were trapped in the hold and drowned. It was so important to these Zionists to create a majority Jewish demographic in Palestine that they were willing to attack Jewish refugees on the day they were set to leave. It was worth the risk. Ironically, it was Palestinian Arab ships, along with the British, who rescued the survivors. Irgun first tried unsuccessfully to plant a bomb. Then Haganah planted a bomb on November 22nd, they claim, but it did not detonate. So on November 24th, they smuggled in a second bomb, this one larger than the first. And on the 25th, when the ship was full of passengers, they blew it up. Monya Mardor smuggled both bombs in the same way. He used a leather sack, commonly being used to carry lunches of workers, to conceal the bombs. His cohort, who would light the fuse, was named Hans van Vel. Van Vel died in the attack. As you can imagine, most of those who drowned were those trapped in the hull of the ship, as it turned on its side and sank, followed of course by the children, who no doubt would have been the least able to resist the drag of the ship sinking, or swim to shore even if they could. Their little lungs filled up with water, and they died. They would never know or understand why they were being killed, or that their deaths were the result of the zeal that fanatics thought was important, to import the right bloodline in order for the self-proclaimed race of God to inhabit the dirt they read about in religious schools. They died a horrible death. Monya Mardor went on to become the Director General of the Israel Weapons Research and Development Authority. This was even after admitting he played a central role in an act of terrorism. For Zionists, the ends justify the means. The Haganah officer in charge of the operation was Yitzhak Sada, a Polish Jew who would become the founder of the IDF. The attack was authorized by Moshe Sharet, who would become the second Prime Minister of Israel. At the time, he led the political department of the Jewish Agency. This was a temporary position in the absence of the man who held that position usually, David Ben-Gurion, who would become the first Prime Minister of Israel. He was on a trip to the United States at the time. The Jewish Agency is the same group responsible for the Havara Agreement, which cut a deal with Nazis to deport Jews to Palestine. The Jewish Agency is also who sent Paul Kersberg to the U.S., one of the spies who was swept up for celebrating the attack of September 11th. He and his brother and other spies were caught in a moving van, which turned out to be a front for Israeli intelligence. He and his brother's names were already on the CIA's counterterrorism watch list. They, with other spies, were swept up after being witnessed celebrating the attacks of September 11th. Kersberg admits that the Jewish agencies who organized and sent them there, it was whited out, but not in the footnote in the documents from the FBI's interrogation of these individuals. I issued a Freedom of Information Act request to retrieve 1,800 pages of these interrogations, which led into more moving companies and more operatives. There is a 5-hour documentary about that called The Empire Unmasked, and I really encourage you to purchase that. It appears that the Jewish Agency never left their terrorist roots. The Israeli government is literally the outgrowth of terrorist organizations and Nazi collaborators. It wasn't the first or last time that Jewish terrorists killed British sailors, civilians, or blamed the acts on others. It wasn't the last time the Jewish terrorists attacked ships either. When the Pan Crescent, a ship that was part of a duo of ships with the Pan York carrying 15,000 illegal immigrants, stopped in Venice for outfitting, there was an underwater explosion. Haganah immediately blamed it on Arab terrorists. but it wasn't the case. On July 18, 1946, the SS Exodus, which was carrying illegal Jewish immigrants to Palestine, was intercepted by the British HMS Ajax and returned to Haifa, and then the refugees were deported back to Europe. In 1951, it was revealed to David Balfour by the first director of the Mossad, Reuven Shiloh, in a report signed by Menachem Begin, plans for the Palyam, the naval unit of Haganah, to sabotage HMS Ajax. It was to show the British that British intelligence was neither omnipotent or infallible. However, perhaps they underestimated British caution, as the ship was moved from its berth in Haifa to Malta. Menachem Begin, who in 1946 was the leader of the Stern Gang, famous for shooting up Palestinian villages, which also blew up the British embassy in Rome, destroyed half the building, became Israel's 6th prime minister. He is also the founder of the Likud party. You see, with Ben-Gurion and Moshe Sharet and Menachem Begin all having terrorist roots and all being Israeli prime ministers, that Israel's terrorist beginnings were not just a few bad apples. With the IDF flowing neatly from Haganah's Palmach and Burcha units, with all the same officers in charge, Israel did not simply start with terrorism and then switch over to form a state for Holocaust victims. Israel's founders are all terrorists at the core, and their activities never changed. They only became state-ordained.
Albert Einstein, who was offered the first presidency of Israel, I assume for credibility purposes,
steadfastly refused it and spoke out against having a Jewish state. Having a Jewish state was as silly as having a Jewish bus or Jewish chair. Whatever early Zionist movement seeking a safe homeland for Jewish refugees that had begun was quickly taken over by religious fanatics and psychopaths. Einstein and other prominent Jews all signed a letter to the paper of record, the New York Times, which called Menachem Begin a terrorist.
On December 4th, 1948, Albert Einstein, Hannah Arendt, Sidney Hook, and other prominent anti-Zionist Jews wrote a letter to the New York Times stating, "Among the most disturbing political phenomena of our times is the emergence in the newly created State of Israel of the Freedom Party, Likud, a political party closely akin in its organization, methods, political philosophy, and social appeal to the Nazi and fascist parties. It was formed out of the membership and following of the former Irgun Zayva, a terrorist right-wing chauvinist organization in Palestine. The current visit of Menachem Begin, leader of this party, to the United States is obviously calculated to give the impression of American support for his party in the coming Israeli elections, and to cement political ties with conservative Zionist elements in the United States. Several Americans of national repute have lent their names to welcome his visit. It is inconceivable that those who oppose fascism throughout the world, if correctly informed as to Begin's political record and perspectives, could add their names and support to the movement he represents. Before irreparable damage is done by way of financial contributions, public manifestations in Begin's behalf, and the creation in Palestine of an impression that a large segment of America supports fascist elements in Israel, the American public must be informed as to the record and objectives of Mr. Begin and his movement. The public avowals of Begin's party are no guide whatever to its actual character. Today they speak of freedom, democracy, and anti-imperialism, whereas until recently they openly preached the doctrine of the fascist state. It is in its actions that the terrorist party betrays its real character. From its past actions, we can judge what it may be expected to do in the future. Attack on an Arab village. A shocking example was their behavior in the Arab village of Deir Yassin. This village, off the main roads and surrounded by Jewish lands, had taken no part in the war, and had even fought off Arab bands who wanted to use the village as their base. On April 9th, terrorist bands attacked this peaceful village, which was not a military objective in the fighting, killed most of the inhabitants, 240 men, women, and children, and kept a few of them alive to parade as captives through the streets of Jerusalem. Most of the Jewish community was horrified at the deed, and the Jewish agency sent a telegram of apology to King Abdullah of Transjordan. But the terrorists, far from being ashamed of their act, were proud of this massacre, publicized it widely, had invited all the foreign correspondents present in the country to view the heaped corpses and the general havoc of Deir Yassin. The Deir Yassin incident exemplifies the character and actions of the Freedom Party. Within the Jewish community, they have preached an admixture of ultranationalism, religious mysticism, and racial superiority. Like other fascist parties, they have been used to break strikes and have themselves pressed for the destruction of free trade unions. In their stead, they have proposed corporate unions on the Italian fascist model. During the last years of sporadic anti-British violence, the IZL and Stern groups inaugurated a reign of terror in the Palestine Jewish community. Teachers were beaten up for speaking against them. Adults were shot for not letting their children join them. By gangster methods, beatings, window smashings, and widespread robberies, the terrorists intimidated the population and exacted a heavy tribute. This is the unmistakable stamp of a fascist party for whom terrorism against Jews, Arabs, and British alike, and misrepresentation are a means, and a leader state is the goal. In light of the foregoing considerations, it is imperative that the truth about Mr. Begin and his movement be known in this country. It is all the more tragic that the top leadership of American Zionism has refused to campaign against Begin's efforts, or even to expose its own constituents to the dangers to Israel from support to Begin.
Well, you don't have to be Einstein to know that Menachem Begin was a terrorist. 8 days after Ajax had intercepted the SS Exodus, Zionist terrorists bombed the King David Hotel, killing 91 people. It was at the time the worst terrorist attack not at sea in the 20th century. It wasn't surpassed until the Oklahoma City bombing of 1995. The King David Hotel wasn't the last hotel bombing either. The Semiramis Hotel was bombed 2 years later, killing a couple dozen people. In August 1946, a Palyam terrorist operative with the codename Marshalik bombed the British ship Empire Haywood while it was in Haifa Harbor. Haganah had set up a company called TAS, which smuggled dynamite into Palestine. Many American Jews willingly collaborated with Jewish terrorists to illegally ship arms to Palestine. In 1947, Nissan Leviathan, the Palyam commander in France, who had also worked in a human trafficking unit, the Birchah of Haganah, chose one Dov Mills to set up a bomb on the ship named Empire Rival. Dov recruited one Gerald Ludeau as a cohort, and they snuck dynamite into the ship's kitchen, similar to what Mardor had done with his first bomb attempt on the Patria. They then moved the dynamite into the ship's bilge area. The plan was to blow it up after it docked in Hamburg. However, the British sent bomb squads onto all 3 ships that arrived and discovered the dynamite before the timer had blown them up. There was about 10 kilo of dynamite. Of course, we all know that after becoming the State of Israel, that the terrorist gangs now formed into the state institutions did not stop committing terrorism or blowing up ships. Old Lyndon Baines Johnson, the nephew of a ZOA member, was sleeping with Matilda Krim, an Irgun terrorist, the night and morning of the Six-Day War. It was in that war that the Israelis covertly attacked an American ship, the USS Liberty, in unmarked planes, and tried to blame it on the Egyptians. But that's a topic for a future film.